The house was sold before Margaret even knew it was listed. She found out from a neighbor. "I saw the sign come down this morning," Mrs. Keller said gently, standing at Margaret's kitchen door like someone delivering news about weather instead of history. "Your son works fast." Margaret didn't answer right away. She turned back toward the sink, dried her hands carefully, and stared out at the backyard where a tire swing still hung from the oak tree. It had been there for 32 years. Long enough to hold 3 different childhoods. "My son doesn't make fast decisions," she said finally. But even as she spoke, she knew that wasn't true anymore. Daniel had changed after his father died. Grief rearranges people. Some become softer. Others become efficient. Margaret walked into the living room where framed photos covered the far wall. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, a hospital photo from the day Daniel was born, her younger self smiling like the world had just begun. She had given Daniel the house in her will years ago, not because she planned to leave soon, but because she wanted him to feel secure. Anchored. Apparently, he had felt something else. That evening, Daniel came by unannounced. He didn't sit down. He didn't remove his coat. He stood near the doorway like a guest, not a son. "It's done," he said. "The paperwork is finalized." Margaret waited for explanation. "It didn't come. You didn't ask me," she replied quietly. "I didn't need to," Daniel said. "It's already legally mine." The sentence landed harder than he intended. Margaret nodded once, not because she agreed, but because arguing would expose something fragile she wasn't ready to show. "Why?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. Not long, just enough to reveal discomfort. "I have debts," he admitted. "Medical bills. The business didn't survive after Dad passed. I tried to fix it without telling you." Margaret studied his face. He looked tired, older than he should have. But there was something else there too. Distance. "You could have told me," she said. "I didn't want you to worry." Margaret almost smiled at that. Children never understand that silence worries mothers more than truth ever could. "When do I have to leave?" she asked. 30 days. 30 days to pack a lifetime. After he left, Margaret walked slowly through each room. She touched walls the way people touch gravestones. The house had held arguments and apologies, celebrations and silence. It had held her marriage, her mistakes, her son's first steps, and now it belonged to strangers. She paused in Daniel's old bedroom. The paint was still pale blue beneath the newer coats. She remembered the night he told her he wanted to leave for college. The fear in his voice disguised as excitement. Back then, she let him go because that's what love required. Now she wondered if letting go had become too easy. On the kitchen counter sat the envelope Daniel had left behind by accident. It was thin, unsealed. Margaret didn't mean to read it, but she did. Inside was a bank statement she didn't recognize. Not Daniel's business account, not his personal one, a joint account, with a name she had never heard before. Margaret sat down slowly, because debts explain urgency, but they don't explain secrets. And for the first time since her husband's funeral, Margaret felt something sharper than grief. She felt doubt. Margaret did not confront Daniel immediately. At her age, she had learned that reacting too quickly often closes doors that patience might open. Instead, she placed the bank statement back into the envelope exactly as she had found it. She set it on the kitchen counter where Daniel would notice it missing if he came looking. Then she made tea she didn't drink and sat at the table, staring at the unfamiliar name printed beside her son's. Elena Ruiz. The name meant nothing to her. Not a business partner, not a client, not a childhood friend. Margaret had always known the important names in Daniel's life. Or at least, she thought she had. That night, she called him. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Did you forget something?" she asked calmly. A pause. Paper shuffling in the background. "What do you mean? You left an envelope on the counter." Silence. Then, controlled. "I'll pick it up tomorrow." Margaret waited. "You don't want to explain it?" "It's just paperwork, Mom." She almost corrected him. It wasn't paperwork. It was a question, but she chose a different route. "Is she helping you with the debts?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes," Daniel said. Something like that. Margaret heard the hesitation. Mothers develop a particular ear for it. It's not in the words. It's in the air between them. "Is she important?" Margaret asked gently. Daniel exhaled. "Why does that matter?" "Because secrets rarely travel alone," Margaret thought. "It matters," she said quietly, "because you're selling your childhood home to solve something you haven't told me about." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said, "You wouldn't understand." Margaret felt that sentence more than she heard it. I might not, she replied. But you didn't give me the chance. The call ended without resolution. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived earlier than expected. He went straight to the kitchen counter and picked up the envelope, sliding it into his coat pocket without looking at her. Margaret watched him. You've been seeing her, she said. Not accusing. Stating. Daniel froze briefly, then nodded. For how long? A year. A year. An entire year of dinners, conversations, problems, and plans she had known nothing about. Does she know about the house? Margaret asked. Yes. And she thinks this is the right decision? Daniel's jaw tightened. She thinks I should stop living in the past. Margaret almost laughed at that. The house was not the past. It was continuity, stability, memory anchored in brick and wood. Does she live here? Margaret asked. Daniel hesitated again. She will. The room shifted. So this isn't just about debt, Margaret said slowly. No. He didn't elaborate. Margaret studied her son carefully. The exhaustion in his eyes wasn't just financial strain. It was conflict, pressure. She doesn't want me here, Margaret said quietly. Daniel looked up sharply. She never said that. She didn't have to. Daniel rubbed his forehead. It's complicated. Margaret nodded. It always is. That evening, after he left, Margaret walked outside and sat beneath the old oak tree. The tire swing moved slightly in the breeze, creaking softly like an old memory unwilling to disappear. She thought about Elena Ruiz. About a woman she had never met shaping decisions that displaced her. Margaret did not resent Daniel for loving someone new. That wasn't the wound. The wound was being quietly removed from the picture. Rewritten as temporary, replaceable. And as the sun lowered behind the house that would soon no longer be hers, Margaret realized something that unsettled her more than the sale itself. Daniel wasn't just hiding a relationship. He was hiding a reason. And reasons built on secrecy rarely protect anyone. Margaret decided not to wait for answers. If Elena Ruiz was shaping her son's life, then Margaret needed to see the shape clearly. 3 days later, Daniel called. Can we have dinner? He asked. All of us. Margaret understood immediately. All of us, she repeated. Yes, me, Elena, and you. The invitation was careful, controlled, like someone attempting balance on fragile ground. They met at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Neutral space. Public. Safe. Margaret arrived first. She chose a table near the window, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. She had dressed simply but intentionally. Not defensive, not fragile, present. When Daniel walked in, Elena followed. Elena Ruiz was younger than Margaret expected. Early 30s, perhaps. Dark hair pulled back neatly. Composed posture. The kind of composure built from having to hold herself together for a long time. She smiled politely. Mrs. Hayes, I've heard a lot about you. Margaret returned the smile. I'm sure you have. They sat. For the first few minutes, the conversation moved cautiously. Work, the city, the weather. Daniel spoke too much, filling silence before it could grow. Margaret observed. Elena was not dismissive, not arrogant, not careless. She was protective. After the waiter left with their orders, Margaret set her napkin down. I'd like to understand something, she said calmly. Daniel shifted. Elena suggested selling the house, Margaret continued. That part I've figured out. What I haven't figured out is why it needed to happen so quickly. Elena looked at Daniel once, then back at Margaret. I didn't suggest it because I dislike you, she said carefully. I suggested it because Daniel has been covering something up. Margaret felt the air change. Daniel stared at the table. Elena, he warned quietly. No, Elena said softly. She deserves to know. Margaret's eyes moved between them. Know what? Daniel finally looked up. The business didn't just fail, he said. I borrowed against the house last year. Margaret's chest tightened. How much? Daniel swallowed. Almost all of it. The words landed slowly. You mortgaged the house, Margaret said. Yes. Without telling her. Without asking. Margaret felt something shift inside her. Not rage. Not even betrayal in the dramatic sense. Disappointment. You were going to lose it anyway, Daniel continued quickly. The sale is the only way to cover it before foreclosure. I thought if I sold it myself, you wouldn't have to see that part. Margaret absorbed the truth. Elena leaned forward slightly. He didn't tell you because he didn't want you to think he failed, she said. But the bank wouldn't wait much longer. Margaret studied Elena again. She wasn't the enemy. She was the one who had forced Daniel to stop pretending. And you're willing to live in a house built from that? Margaret asked her. Elena didn't hesitate. I'm willing to build something new. But not on lies. Silence settled between them. Margaret looked at her son. Really looked at him. You were ashamed, she said softly. Daniel nodded once. I didn't want to be the man who lost everything Dad built. Margaret felt her husband's memory enter the room quietly. Your father built a business, she said. Not your worth. Daniel's expression cracked slightly. I thought selling the house quietly would protect you. It didn't, Margaret replied. It just removed me. The truth hung there. After dinner, they stood outside the restaurant under dim streetlights. Margaret surprised herself by turning to Elena. Thank you, she said. Elena blinked. For what? For not letting him carry this alone. Daniel looked between them, confused. Margaret placed a hand briefly on her son's arm. The house is wood and brick, she said. I can leave it. What I won't leave is my place in your life. Daniel's eyes filled before he could stop them. I didn't know how to tell you, he admitted. You start by telling the truth, Margaret said gently. The house would still be sold. That reality did not change. But something else did. Margaret was not being erased. She was being repositioned. And for the first time since Mrs. Keller mentioned the sign coming down, Margaret understood something clearly. The real loss would not have been the house. It would have been silence. And this time, silence had been broken before it could do permanent damage.